hand you over to. I'll hand you over now to Stella, just to say a few words before we kick off with the first question.
Hi, Sue, and hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm interested in what the conversations we can have. I'm also really excited that people want to talk about what is possible following Brexit, because it has been sometimes a bit of a lonely pursuit. I sit here as the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe, wanting to talk about what could happen next, rather than to prosecute the whys and wherefores of the last 8 years in British politics. And I say that not to defend the nature of British politics, but simply to recognise the devastating impact that Brexit is having on this country, and therefore the importance of seeing what we can do to try and address those challenges. I'm really interested in the questions that you've asked, because it feels to me like we're all looking at those issues now. You as people living and breathing this discussion, us as politicians trying to work out what we can do next. And I think there is the opportunity to do something next. I think the debate is moving in Parliament, the debate is moving in the country. What it needs now is for all of us to understand what those options are. And I think today we can have some real fun looking into those and what that might mean in terms of campaigning. I warn you in advance, my answer to many things will be, please get involved, because above all, we need your expert insight and your experience on the ground of what is happening in the Labour Movement for Europe to help inform what we do next. We've got the Labour Party conference coming up in the next 24, 48 hours. It's the experience of people on the ground that I think is so critical to showing why it matters that we don't put Brexit in the too difficult to deal with box, because the alternative is going to be far worse. I'll stop there. I can see there's lots of questions coming in. Sue, do you want to start with the first people? Because I always think it's nice if people get to ask their own questions, and perhaps we take in groups of 3.
Well, I'll start with the 6 questions that were submitted in advance. The first 3 of those, the people are actually on the call. So the first person is Lisa Burton. So Mariana, if you could unmute Lisa. She's got a question about the riots.
Hi, Stella. Thanks
Hi, Lisa.
for joining us. I'm Vice Chair of Bremain in Spain. I'm also a National Council representative who sits on the Executive Committee of European Movement UK. So my question is, the recent riots were difficult to watch, but also not unexpected, considering certain media reporting and the political environment for the past few years, particularly since Brexit. Will Labour consider press reform going forward? And how will the government respond to Reform UK MPs intent on stirring up further division?
Okay. Do you want to take another 2, Sue?
Sure.
Yeah.
The next question is from Clarissa Kilwick.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to show that British people abroad, we're really just as ordinary as British people in the UK. Thanks to Brexit, I for a number of years lost a vote, being able to vote in any country at all. This year I was able to vote again in the UK. So my question is, in the past, Labour were not in favour of lifting the 15-year rule for overseas voters. So has there been a change of heart now, or are we at risk of losing this important right again? Thank you.
And the third question is from Steve Wilson.
Oh, Anthony, I think you need to mute yourself. We're getting a bit of feedback.
How's that? Anything?
Yes. Yes,
Yes, I can hear you now.
Hello, Stella.
Hi, Steve.
I've been a Labour Party supporter for most of the last 60 years, apart from a very brief flirtation with the Lib Dems a few years ago. And that flirtation shaped my question. Do you believe proportional representation would be a prerequisite for rejoining the single market, the customs union, or the EU? And what's the position of the labour market, the labour movement for Europe on that particular subject?
Great. Wow, 3 completely different subjects, which is really interesting because of the range of things that come up as a result of Brexit. Let me start with Lisa, and thank you for asking about this, because I don't know whether you saw, my community was directly affected by the threat of violence. We didn't have any violence, but we took to the streets as a community. We stood round our local mosques. We stood together because people were so divided. And absolutely, this didn't happen in a vacuum. For some time now, I've been very worried about the rise of the far right, the rise of far right rhetoric. It comes online, it's offline too. It's obviously been shaping a number of debates here. And it was an incredibly scary time. And I'm very proud to represent a very, very diverse community. I'm very proud of the fact that when that pressure came, people were very clear that it was not welcome here, but acutely conscious that we don't want to get to the point where these things are happening in the first place. You know, that it's not that we should be simply proud that if you're put under pressure in the UK, actually people do say we reject this type of politics. We shouldn't get to the point where the pressure is coming in the first place. With that in mind, one of the conversations I've been having with people for some time as chair of the Labour Movement Europe is like, look, absolutely, you are talking about what President Trump is doing, you're talking about who he's talking to in British politics, but have you seen what's happening in Europe? Have you seen what's happening with Viktor Orban? Have you seen what's happening with Le Pen and what's happening in France? Have you seen Giorgia Meloni? Even whether we're seeing the impact of far-right politics on the choices and decisions being made by other political parties, so what's been happening in Sweden and Denmark. I am very concerned, if I'm honest about it, that the left has been very complacent about the idea that far-right extremism, Islamophobia, racism wouldn't take seed in our political discourse. And so for too long has said, these are extremes, just ignore them and people will not, don't platform them, go away. We have to confront them. Having said that, and having agreed with your analysis is a very serious point, the reason why I don't think this is about press reform, I think there are other reasons why we need to talk about press reform, is because the reason why my community was put under pressure was that somebody circulated via WhatsApp a list of 60 immigration lawyers that were going to be targeted next. That is not the traditional print media. That is not even a forum that has some modicum of regulation. The role for Ofcom, for example. Now, I say, for avoidance of doubt, I'm not suggesting that there isn't an issue about press reform that we need to address. I know people have very great concerns about GB News, for example, and its impartiality. I think there are questions about where you blur the line between opinion and fact, and that's online and offline. It's to recognise that the way in which the far right is organising is not through traditional forums and media. So that debate, that discourse is late to the mainstream media rather than generated in the mainstream media. What do I mean by that? I mean, it's as much as in your local Facebook groups, it's in the Telegram groups, it's in the WhatsApp messages. That calls for a necessary different response, because actually, if we load this solely onto press reform, I fear we will be too late. We'll be too late in calling for a defence of free speech that recognises if 50% of the conversation is terrified because there is violence, because there is intimidation, because there is this constant drumbeat that whatever the problem is, the answer is immigration is the issue. Actually, we're not getting to the source of it, and we're not challenging where that's coming into modern political discourse. And I say that as somebody who now spends more of her time in WhatsApp groups with local residents than actually on even Twitter and X. I mean, X feels, 10 years ago now for me now. I think it is separate about the role of politicians and the questions of standards. And I think there are some very interesting questions about our roles and our responsibilities in terms of leadership of that debate. I have called for a national conversation. That is a national conversation about accountability for all of us, because I think that we have to all be accountable for what we are doing, to challenge those rhetorics, to challenge those ideas, to take on. I mean, for example, I see it in the connections with Andrew Tate, particularly in the work that I've done around misogyny and the rise of the far right and how that's been used as a sort of gateway. Hope Not Hate, I've got some very interesting research on this. That is also an accountability for all MPs of all elected professions. I am somebody who has already debated, discussed, and disagreed with the Reform MPs in Parliament, but I will hold them to the same standards that I will hold politicians in all political parties for the consequences of their actions, as I expect myself to be held. Clarissa, you ask about the 15-year rules role, and the absolute honest truth is, I suspect the debate around electoral reform in this country will be more rooted in wondering about electoral registration and about voter ID than the 15-year rule, because we saw quite a marked impact on certain groups in society about their ability to take part. And I know the Electoral Commission is looking at that. I think we have to see what the Electoral Commission comes back with in terms of whether or not this is a practical solution. I understand and appreciate what you're saying about you had a vote. It would be remiss of me not to say I want to see what the Electoral Commission says first. And then, Steve, you asked about proportional representation. I'm not quite sure if I understand. I don't want to misunderstand how you connect that to the single market and customs union. I don't know whether you could just tell me a little bit more about why you think the voting system, and I say this as somebody who's always purported to support electoral reform, and I do. I have to, although I prefer AV plus to straight PR. But
I
why
think
you
the,
think
I think the point. So I think the point there was that the question was, do you think that proportional representation will be a prerequisite with the EU in order to rejoin the single market?
So you think the electoral voting system would be part of the that we use in the UK would be part of the negotiating discussion that the EU would wish to have with us?
Yes, in terms of what their thinking is in...
I'm not aware of anywhere in which the electoral system used has been part of the negotiation. I don't, for example, with the discussions that they're having with other countries that are on the accession process. I don't want to misunderstand the point that Steve is making. I
think Steve's muted at the moment.
Oh. Am I unmuted now?
You're unmuted.
There you are,
now.
yes. Hello, Steve.
Hello there. I think we're a special case, having been a member of the EU for so many years and now seeking to remake some sort of a relationship. And I can understand their fears of a certain percentage of a smaller percentage of the UK saying, no, we don't want this. Proportional representation would give voice to the many people in this country who wish to become Europeans once again. And also, I wanted to know if Labour Movement for Europe had a particular stance on PR. So that shaped the question as well.
So let me be clear. The Labour Movement for Europe is an affiliate organisation. So it's not that we take a particular position on policies. I can tell you what my position as the national chair is. I say, look, I have always campaigned for electoral reform, not because I think it makes a single person vote, but because I think it is the right thing to do. I prefer AV plus because I do think the constituency link is important in our politics, especially with devolution. I think it's really important that you represent and you vet them. And I've always, when I've had the opportunity, voted for electoral reform policies within the political process, because I also don't think you can do just the voting system. I think you've got a broader question there about how you win the argument, because actually one of the reasons why, I'll be upfront, we as an organisation are not particularly, I don't think you can make Brexit work. We've always been clear about that. We do think that you can resolve quite a lot of the problems that it has created in the first instance, and that should be the priority, because the alternative of any of these things, whether it's fully rejoining, I mean, we are around the edges of the single market and we are affected by the single market. So I always think it's a bit of a canard to say that we've completely left it, in the same way that inevitably the trading decisions made in Europe affect what we can do here, because we are interconnected. You know, you can fight many things in life, but you can't really fight geography. It's just a thing. You know? But in terms of winning any arguments about what happens next, you know, you're right. The British public are far ahead of the political debate. They've moved on from 2016 and 2019,
and Gen
but
Z.
they are also very clear that this was a democratic decision. right? And that as a result, you would need some kind of democratic moment to change it substantially. That doesn't mean that that might not happen. Nobody can rule out anything. If we've learned anything in the last couple of years of politics, is that things go up and down in all sorts of ways you never expected, not least Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister. But it does mean that I think we face a very hard choice as people who recognise the damage, especially that the nature of the Brexit that the previous government negotiated, in what do you focus on? And I have to be honest with you, when I talk to the businesses who can't import things into the UK anymore, who are sitting with lorry loads of food sat in Calais or sat in Sevington, the people who are missing out on school trips, the businesses thinking about whether they invest, we haven't got the 7 or 8 years of treaty negotiation time and a referendum that we need. What we have to ruthlessly do as people who recognise the damage that Brexit has done is work out how we can save what is essentially already on fire. So, for example, I'm very passionate about the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention. So passionate, it probably puts people to sleep, frankly. But that is something I think we could negotiate to be part of again relatively quickly, compared to something which would take treaty change. I mean, talk to the people in the Ukraine. You know, they are on a fast track. That's still a 7 to 8 year process. British businesses, British workers do not have that length of time before the damage that Brexit has done is going to be so great, we'll never be able to do anything about it. But I also think we do have to respect and recognise that if you are the European Union, you know, I always say Brexit is like the terrible man your aunt married 20 years ago. And you put up with him at Christmas every single year, and finally she divorced him. You know, you're not going to invite him round for Easter cake anytime soon. We have to respect and recognise, and I suspect you are feeling this most of all, just how much we trashed our status, the goodwill, the general sense that the UK was somebody you want to work with through Brexit. And the idea that we could very quickly get the time and energy and effort that our European partners would require for any sort of rejoin effort, I just think it's a bit disrespectful to them more than anything. We have to show that we are not a nation anymore that, as I say, 18 months ago, it's only 18 months ago, we elected a prime minister who couldn't decide whether the French were friend or foe. That doesn't mean, Steve, that we can't, within any electoral system, make arguments about what is possible. But I do think you have to be clear about what the timescales are for things and what the process for deciding them is. And actually, as much as I am a proponent for electoral reform, I don't think that is a precursor to getting a better, clearer. James says, just say so in public. Everything I'm saying now, I've always said. It's just that I'm a humble backbench MP. I apologise if you know you need somebody more important, but I hope, Sue, this is the start of people coming to talk to you. But it is, you know, it is so important to me that we try and save what we can save, because any future conversation will be harmed by what is lost. And I don't think that's about the voting system. I've got to be honest with you, as much as I'm somebody who would always campaign for reform in our voting system in of itself anyway, I think that is to do with people's sense about what is possible. Actually, one of the things I worry about is if we spend our time still prosecuting the debates of 2016 and 2019, which so many people in Parliament, I'm afraid, still do on this, well, that means we're not talking about what is possible in 2024. So we're not giving people hope that you can actually sort some of these problems out, you know, that you can sort out the madness at the border, that you can sort out what happens with Erasmus, you can sort out youth mobility. I believe that you can. I wouldn't be doing this role if I didn't, but I think we have to be really clear about the timescales in it, because we owe it to our European counterparts to recognise we've got a lot of ground to make up with them. And look, frankly, that's what's really good about what the government is doing right now. They are going round and proving not just that they're not Liz Truss, which I know sounds like quite a low threshold, but that they are actually people you want to work with, that they get the concept of mutual interest, that they understand we're asking a lot for people to pay us attention again, because we have been that awful man your aunt married.
Thank you. You're on mute, Steve. Okay, thank you for that very comprehensive answer, Stella. The next three questions, there is an overlap with these, so it might be easier to roll them all together. The first one came from Helen Johnston, who is editor of our newsletter, who's currently on a plane. She asked, all the recent surveys say that Labour voters and members overwhelmingly believe Brexit was a mistake and would like to see it reversed as far as possible. Will the leadership come under pressure at the Labour Party conference this autumn from grassroots members? The next one is from Ruth Woodhouse, who is one of our very active lobbyists. Keir Starmer has repeatedly stated there will be no return to the single market, customs union, or freedom of movement. Do you not believe that in an ever-changing world and political landscape, it is a mistake to rule out anything? And then finally, an anonymous question. How do we persuade those that believe immigrants are the cause of all their problems that the fault lies elsewhere?
Great. I will try to be quicker. The politicians, please, we go on forever. So, I mean, define pressure would be my first question, Helen, not least because we're just about, if you're a member of the Labour Movement for Europe, you're just about to get an email about our conference rally. I'm quite excited because we've got some really big hitters coming to speak. I know your next question is going to be, are you going to be able to stream it? I promise you, I'm obsessed with policy, but I'm technologically limited. So there may be a challenge in being able to do that, but we do want to try and share with people. We've got Nick Thomas-Symonds coming, and of course, he's the person doing the negotiations with Europe. We've got the new chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, which is Emily Thornberry, who's going to play an absolutely key role, because there is a challenge in Parliament, because obviously the European Scrutiny Committee has been disbanded. Now, you know, people will have known that as Bill Cash's committee. That's not a fair reflection of the role that it was playing, and I frankly thought it could continue to play. So absolutely, the question about where is the conversation about Europe going to be taking place, but I promise you, the Sunday evening at conference, we have got a big, serious rally, which we are organising to make sure that discussion of Europe is part and parcel of what goes on in the Labour movement. I would say this, wouldn't I? But if you join the Labour Movement for Europe, you can help strengthen my ability to keep those debates going and keep the discussions happening at a grassroots level. But just to blow our trumpet a little bit, there are now more Labour Movement for Europe parliamentarians than there are Conservative parliamentarians in Parliament. We are formally affiliated. If you're a Labour Party member, you'll know how serious this is, to over half the constituencies across the country. We've got thousands of members now. That shows, and that has been growing. So that shows there is the interest and appetite. Absolutely, conference is a key event. That's why we're doing this rally. We haven't been able, I'll be upfront, because of the election, it completely kiboshed the conference motion process for us to do a conference motion. But actually, I'm quite excited about the fact that we've got the man who's doing the negotiations. There's an opportunity, if you are going to be in Liverpool, to show how serious you think this is, and that relationship is there. And I cannot tell you how different that is to, say, a year and a half ago, when, as I said at the start, it sometimes felt a bit of a lonely endeavour to be the person going, can we talk about this? And people, look, if we're honest, people across the political spectrum felt wrung out. They felt so frustrated, so emotionally drained by the discussion. I understand why people didn't want to have it. I just think we do need to do that now, and that is happening. As part of that, Ruth, look, absolutely. That's why I say we should look at all options, including the timelines. My concern about things like the customs union and the single market is the timeline, because I think of the small businesses in my constituency who've just said that the point about Brexit for them is paperwork, and can they hold on for another 18 months? Possibly. Could they hold on for 5 years? No. That's what I'm really worried about. So it's a question for me. I think it's right to look at everything. That's why, for example, I have challenged the Labour Party to look again at the idea of youth mobility, because whilst what I thought the European Commission came up with wouldn't work for us, because it wasn't actually youth mobility, it was one country. It didn't include apprenticeships, for example, which I think is really important in all of this. The idea that there could be a scheme, I think, is something we should be exploring, and we'll continue to have that debate and discussion within the LME. But I really want to go on to your anonymous question, which is, and I promise to, I will stop myself, one of the things I feel really passionate about. If we say and do nothing else as progressive people, we have to be clear that the problem is not immigrants. The problem is politicians. It is politicians failing to show that in a world that is so complicated and changes so quickly, I mean, frankly, I have got jumpers older than the internet. But if we think about how the internet and our ability to interact and network has fundamentally transformed our lives, you understand how quickly we're seeing change happen and how destabilizing that can be for people. One of my favorite statistics is if you think about Facebook, Facebook was made public for the public to use in 2007. It now appears in over a third of divorces as a source of material. So that most precious thing, our relationship with our loved one, has been fundamentally transformed by our ability to get online and find all those people we were at school with. That is such a change. And it's not just those changes in our relationships, you know, movement of people around the country, industries, evolves. So things like the pandemic, we have lived through lots of very destabilizing events. And yes, at every turn, frankly, there have been people on left and right who have looked at it and gone, what we need to do is find somebody to blame. And the right is very effective at blaming. It starts with immigrants, it moves on to trans people, to people who need welfare support, then women. I mean, you can see that the pattern. The left actually has engaged in some of that debate as well, where it's been about finding somebody to blame. The challenge with that blame culture that politics can thrive in is absolutely, it might win you a vote at the ballot box, but it doesn't win you the consent for the change that needs to happen. So yes, it is a frustration for me that we have come to a point where people blame immigration when they really should be blaming politicians for being so problem focused rather than solution focused. I came into politics to change the world. I think change is possible, but I'll be honest with you, I sat on the Council of Europe Refugee and Immigration Committee and used to bang my head in frustration on the desk because the conversation was long on an analysis of why immigrants were causing problems and short on how could we collaborate together to make sure it was possible to help people equally and not put a burden on anybody. That conversation is not just a challenge within European and tackling the far right politics, it's a problem across politics when we give it to politicians that it's okay just to tell us who's caused the problem rather than what you're going to do about it. So it's the same with Labour Party conference, actually, Helen. It's not enough for me to hold a rally and to make sure that the leadership hear and see members and activists there wanting to talk about Europe. We've got to show what we're going to do next. It's the same in terms of what are the trading options, what's happening as a result of Brexit. It's not enough to say, look, here's the damage to these industries. We've got to show where we can rebuild. So, for example, stopping all the charges at the borders so that we can protect our food supply chains and reduce inflation is, to me, one of the things that we should be prioritising, because it helps show why, in the first place, some of those challenges were self-induced harms. I'll stop there, Helen. Sorry, and Ruth and Sue. I find it so frustrating because it's an easy way to win votes, but it doesn't change the world, and yet the world needs to change, and it can change in good and brilliant ways if we work out what we can do together rather than finding someone to blame.
Thank you very much, Stella. That's all of the pre-supplied questions. So it's over to Mariana now, who is going to come up with some questions from the chat.
So based on popularity, we can see that Andrew has asked a question on youth mobility. So he agrees that it's quite important, but he would like to know why we're not expanding.
Well, is Andrew,
yeah,
is Andrew in the chat? Yeah, why don't you unmute him, Mariana?
We can also do. Andrew, would you be happy to? Okay, I've unmuted.
Sure, yes, I'm here.
Hi, Andrew.
Oh.
Hi, Stella. Thank you very much. Yes, I think the question you're referring to, I've said there's been a lot of talk about the need for youth mobility, and that's undeniable. But
Yeah.
Why does the government continue to be deaf to the needs of over 31-year-olds who have careers, lives, families, and businesses across Europe? And my question is, isn't the idea of mobility for under 30s rather ageist and short-sighted?
Bless you, Andrew, as somebody who always loved the fact that the young Fabians was a much older age group than anybody else. Do you want to take, Mariana, should we take 3 questions at a time? I'm so sorry, everybody, because I'm on an iPad. Otherwise, it's a bit hard to see the chat function on iPads. I don't know if anybody else finds that. I always find it difficult to
Colin, would you like to ask your question as well if you're still here with us? Let me check.
Yes, he's there.
There we go. I've unmuted now. No matter
Colin.
how long you have it, does it? You always end up on mute. Mine's quite a straightforward question. There is a large contingency with interests in Europe, which due to the Schengen territories, etc., which is expanding. Nearly all the countries are in Europe. British citizens are restricted to 90 days out of the 180. EU citizens, 180 days in the UK. You leave for a short period of time and come back. I suppose the question is, why are we not into a reciprocal agreement? And is there any plans within the movement to push for that?
Sure.
And last question, Tig, not sure if I'm mispronouncing your name, but would you like to ask your question as well?
Hi, thank you for being here. It's nice
Hi,
to see
Tig.
you. Okay, hi. I'm Tig James. I'm the president of British in Portugal. Okay, so my question is, there are at least 1.2 million UK nationals in the EU, the majority of which are now allowed to vote. It appears the majority of people now wish to rejoin the EU. Come the next election, there will be all these people now allowed to vote. Labour may well lose a lot of support if another party determines they will support joining the EU. The hope is Labour is playing the long game, but how realistic is it that Labour will be looking to have a better relationship with the closest, largest market to the UK, with the possibility of rejoining or potentially losing those votes?
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Those really good questions. I think what I'd do, if it's all right, because I feel like they're connected, Andrew and Colin's questions together, because you're right, the 180-day rule is killing various people's working opportunities. I actually have been trying to table some questions to see how many people have received criminal sanctions as a result of overstaying, which is actually a really difficult thing to get any quantification on. So if anybody's listening to this who can help, I'd really appreciate it.
I gather British in Europe has a court case about that at the moment.
Oh, well, please do encourage them to write to us. I think there's two different things. Look, the youth mobility scheme, the reason, and this is a really important point that I was very, to be honest, frustrated that the British press didn't pick up, but the reason why youth mobility was a thing was because the Conservative government was trying to negotiate it. So the Conservative government had gone and was in the middle of striking deals with, I think, around 7 European countries, which is quite a few, which I did wonder when I saw various then Conservative backbench MPs frothing about it, whether they had understood that the reason why the European Commission had come forward was not because they were trying to undermine Brexit, it was because they were trying to respond to an interest from our then Conservative government that and said, well, rather than negotiating individually, why don't you do something collectively? That was about youth mobility per se. We have had research done. We did it last year. I have no reason to doubt that it wouldn't be the same this year. Indeed, it might be stronger. That shows that whilst the British public are very supportive of visas for people who have jobs. So if you have a job to come here, or if you have a job to go to Europe, they think that you should be able to do that. They think you should be able to work and contribute, which is very different from being able to live in a community on an ongoing basis. That is not age restricted, that feedback from the surveys that we've done. So I think there's two different things here. Clearly, the current system is creating huge headaches for people in terms of their ability to work. If you talk to people in the creative sector, it's absolutely killing one of our biggest exports, which is, music and live performance. And there is talk about a creatives visa that, again, wouldn't be age specific. I think the youth mobility stuff is picked up, and I can see some of the chat, but I can't quite read it. It's talking about Erasmus. Obviously, it's also thinking about students. As I said when I was talking earlier about it, I didn't think what the European Union came up with would work or was a good enough deal. But I did think, okay, let's start talking about this. I'm particularly interested in what we can do on apprenticeships and how we can be really clear that actually for our young people, Brexit has closed so many doors both directly and indirectly in industries and sectors, that we need to do things to address them. Yes, Helen, I know that Erasmus Plus is not just for students, but I do mean that there's been a conversation about the impact on student roll numbers, because obviously we've seen it in higher education in the UK, which is also one of our greatest exports and now in trouble, all of which gets merged into the debate around immigration and the debate where people are conflating refugees and students and then migration. And all of those things need unpacking as far as I'm concerned, because it is a very different thing for people to come to the United Kingdom to study, which a lot of people do, and then to leave with those skills, than it is to come here because you've fallen in love with somebody and you're making a home here, than it is to come here seeking sanctuary because you're fleeing persecution. Our debates suffer accordingly because they don't understand and recognise those things. I think the British public do, but I don't think we give them the credit that we should do about that conversation. What does that mean in practice? Look, I think it's about the talking about stuff. One of the challenges that we have is that everything Europe gets lumped together like it's a lump of plasticine. So there's this presumption that, okay, we should talk about security, because I think people understand that we need to talk about Ukraine, what we do about Putin's aggression, what we do about energy security, and that trade is going to be inevitably part of that, because trade is so much part of the modern world in terms of what you might be at risk of harm over, which is separate from, okay, how do people move around? So, for example, issues around professional qualifications. What I would like to see happen is I would like to see a clear debate about the conditions under which people can get a visa, full stop, and that would cover both the question around the 90, 180 days, but more broadly, being able to work, the sponsorship system, because we have got millions of people affected by this, and it's only going to get worse when the border check stuff comes in October and people are all stuck for hours queuing at King's Cross and whatever. That is separate to how are you going to support young people to get the same opportunities that things like Erasmus offered, and that being able to tie it into our skills market would be, that I think, the way that you show people what we're missing out on. Tig, you ask about the 1.2 million UK nationals. I mean, it is a really interesting. I go back to, there is so much damage done, and we're seeing it now more clearly. And when we first started talking about this stuff, what would happen is people would say, "Oh no, it's the pandemic." Now it's really clear that it's not the pandemic. It is absolutely about the fact that we have cut ourselves off in such an extreme way. And I think people forget how extreme, there was the vote to leave, and then there was what the Conservative government did to enact that. There were lots of choices they made they didn't have to make, which have really, really, if you talk about security, I've got constituents whose family members were murdered overseas, and because we've lost European arrest warrants, I worry about when we'll ever get justice for them, because the perpetrators have fled. Why on earth would we cut ourselves off from that process? And yet we did. We cut ourselves off from biosecurity alerts. So everyone's very worried about foot and mouth disease, but we don't talk to our neighbours about whether or not it's prevalent. I mean, they're just so short-sighted because they're European. Just madness. And I think really damaging for the British economy. My concern is about the timescales and the process. And I will always fight for the thing that would make the biggest impact now, to trying to save the damage that has been done. Of course, that means resetting our relationship. I think it is really positive that pretty much within the first week of being elected, Keir Starmer's visits were to European capitals. That sends a very powerful message about the seriousness and the priority he attaches to getting this right. But we also have a lot of ground to make up, and not very much time before those businesses go, actually, we can't cope with this anymore. That's the challenge that we face here. And it would be wrong of me to suggest to you that all of this could be easily solved. It's like some bad, it's like that part in Dallas where Bobby Ewing comes out of the shower and everyone says, did any of this ever happen? Brexit has happened. There aren't Remainers and Leavers anymore because Brexit has happened, in the same way that privatisation of the nationalised industries in the 1980s happened. What you do next has to be about what's in the best interest of the British people. And for me, the best interest of the British people is that kind of salvage operation. And that's what I'm very focused on. And that's what we as Labour Movement for Europe are very focused on, because I think the alternative, I worry, doesn't help those businesses in my constituency, that they're going to go bust. And I've always got to be accountable to them first and foremost.
Many thanks, Stella, for that comprehensive and passionate answer. Have we got some more questions, Mariana, in the chat?
Yeah, if Claire would like to ask a question as well, I'll unmute her.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting. It's my first time at anything related to Bremain in Spain. I basically have a holiday place in Spain, but I live in Germany. So I'm very affected.
Yeah.
I've been working for Europe for 25 years. I am no longer a European citizen, and I feel I had that taken away from me with no right to vote. And yeah, it was a very strong feeling, I have to say. Yeah. And therefore, my question would be, has the legality of removing our citizenship ever been challenged?
Okay, and Peter Burke, if you'd like to also ask your question.
Hello. Yeah, my question really is about Ireland. I'm Irish myself, and very concerned about the need to have recurrent agreements over Northern Ireland, and the fact that the Windsor Framework, although it was a very brave solution to a complicated problem, has raised problems of its own. How do you see the future?
Yeah.
Thank you. And lastly, Will Harrison, if you'd like to ask your questions.
Hi, hello. Stella, you mentioned about businesses really suffering and full accession to the EU, could take 8 years, even longer. But couldn't there be some kind of joining the SM or the customs union? Why is Labour so adamantly against that? Could that be a solution?
Yeah. Good, really good. Thank you, guys. It's really helpful and interesting to hear what's kind of on your minds. And Claire, I hear and I feel your frustration. The honest truth is I don't know, but I do believe there was something happening at the Council of Europe. You'll have to forgive me, I'm no longer on the Council of Europe. It might be worth checking. I'm sure there's more expertise in this group than mine about the latest in terms of the citizenship questions. I'm really happy if you want to email us to go back and just double check that. But I had in my mind that there was something happening in terms of people raising the question, because it's always the flip side here as well, obviously, about we've got our EU citizens and the status that they are in. And I've been very concerned about how they've been treated. It feels very much like there's a kind of Windrush Mark II moment coming through in terms of why people's status hasn't been resolved. But I don't want to say to you that yes or no, there's been a legal challenge, because I'm not entirely clear. Peter, thank you for raising Northern Ireland, because it's something I've done a lot of work on Northern Irish policy, and it makes me really angry at just how cavalier people have been about the Good Friday Agreement and about why that was such a good example of working across borders and working across territories, but always putting people first. I was particularly concerned the Rwanda legislation, which removed the right of recourse to a court to refugees in Northern Ireland, which therefore breached the European Human Rights Commission and therefore basically destroyed the underpinnings of the Good Friday Agreement. It was a weird moment when myself and the DUP were both pushing at it with the British government from different angles, because we could all see the consequences of what they were doing. Having said that, I think Windsor is a really important moment because it dispels the myth, the Boris Johnson myth, and we have to mention him at some point in this conversation, ladies and gentlemen. We can't ignore that elephant in the room, of cakeism. The idea that there was no point in talking to Europe, and it kind of goes to Will's point, and also Claire and Steve about the single market customs union, that with Europe you're either all in or all out, that you can't do deals, that Europe would always want to punish us. That was his sort of thing. Well, actually, what the Windsor Agreement showed, and I will give credit to Rishi Sunak about this, is that if you are serious and respectful and appreciative of the fact that there is a shared future of a group of people, which is the people of Northern Ireland, at stake, Europe is more than happy to work with the United Kingdom and look at how we can collaborate and overcome some of the challenges that we face. I see it in how Europe has actually approached negotiating with all sorts of countries. So the dismissive prejudice of cakeism, the idea that it's everything or it's nothing, and they always want to punish us, I think gets in the way. It's heat, not light. I mean, that's why I'm passionate about parliamentary scrutiny. It's why I'm passionate about having a debate in 2024, like things like the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention, what you do on the North Sea Energy Cooperative, what you do, yes, about some of the trade rules, what we mean by the single market. There are clearly countries that are further along in a relationship with the single market than we are. So there's obviously much that can be done. And I hope that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement negotiations are an opportunity to have that conversation. And frankly, I'm pushing within Parliament to make sure that Parliament is part of that process too. But I think we should look at the Windsor Agreement as evidence of what can be done, that even post the damage that Brexit has done to our relationship and our standing in Europe, our European colleagues ultimately want the best for the people in Northern Ireland and ultimately wanted to work with us to try and resolve some of the challenges that have been created. There are clearly more challenges, and I do think the Rwanda legislation and the playing fast and loose with the Good Friday Agreement, and frankly, the fact that that wasn't a big part of the conversation in the UK Parliament is a concern to me, and I'll continue to be part of raising that and protecting the GFA and the value of being able to work with our Irish counterparts, whether it's with the UK EU delegation or whether it's with the British Irish delegation, because it's so important. But Will, it also goes to this point about what is possible. You know, until we start actually talking with Europe, and in order to do that, we have to earn people's trust to be able to talk with Europe. And I say that, you know, sometimes in the United Kingdom, we act as if this is all within our grasp, within our determination, as if we are the ones solely who can decide what is on the table. And again, I think that's really disrespectful to our colleagues in Europe, who are also dealing with the rise of the far right, with challenges within their economy, with the growing, you know, the climate crisis that we face, with, yes, huge social and economic change. And we are asking for more of their time and effort and energy. You know, Windsor shows that they are willing to do that, even when they're under huge amounts of pressure. But I don't think we should take for granted that these things would be really easy. And I just think, as a nation, what we should do first and foremost is show how important we think this is. And I feel very much that's what's happening at the moment. Absolutely within that, I want us to open doors and be open-minded. And that's what we as the Labour Movement for Europe are doing. So we are asking questions, trying to find out what's happening, making sure that those conversations are happening both within parliamentary scrutiny, but at a local government level and in local Labour parties too. But I don't think, you know, coming with a kind of list of demands, I think it denies the seriousness of what Brexit was and the damage that it's done. I think we've got to be much more circumspect about what can we do now? Why would Europe want to cooperate with us, given how badly we've damaged things? And what does that then mean for the future? Windsor gives me hope that we can build a future with Europe, but it also shows how serious it has to be before we can get their attention.
Do we have time for one more question, Miranda? Is there another one in the chat?
Maybe to just wrap up the session, if Andrew would like to ask his question regarding Stella's role in the LME, in the Labour Movement for Europe.
Sure, I think that's this one. So as chair of Labour Movement for Europe, what ability do you have to influence government policy on Europe and Keir Starmer's 3 red lines? That's no rejoin the EU, not rejoining the single market, and not restoring freedom of movement.
So you would expect me to say this, Andrew, but we are an affiliate organisation. Let me be very clear what we're not. I am not sat here, the slightly younger version of Marc Francois, all right? We are not a reenactment society. We are a membership organisation. That means that we have members across the country, thousands of them, who are members of the Labour movement and therefore are in Labour Party meetings helping to shape policy. We have a seat at the table. That is the same in Parliament too. I do not say it as a flippant thing. There are more LME parliamentarians than Conservative parliamentarians. It is because of the hard work of people like Mariana. We went out, we campaigned, we had MPs and candidates who sought our support and stood explicitly as Labour Movement for Europe MPs to be part of those conversations. The way that this works is that your voice matters. So the more voices who are part of that process, the more influence that we have. For example, to get to the point where we can have a rally where Nick Thomas Symonds is speaking at it, is because he's recognised the growing nature of the labour movement for Europe. You know, we have Neil Kinnock as our honorary president. We have now a staff body that we didn't used to have. So we are growing, and that increases our capacity to have influence. You know, it may seem odd for a politician to say this, but it really isn't about me. It is absolutely about being a movement. That's why I'm unafraidly, shamelessly saying to all of you, if you want, you know, you don't have to agree with everything I've said or the way that I look at things to think I want people in the room arguing about Europe. I want people talking to their local MPs as their LME delegates about our conference events, talking to them about the motions that we're passing. Yes, raising the issues about youth mobility, but also the Brexit border tax. I want to be part of, you know, we led the campaign against the retained EU law bill in Parliament. I want to be able to support all of that. It's because of our membership and the work that they do to support all that. Yes, I'm a big chunky cog in that as the chair, but if it was just me, absolutely nothing would happen. It is about the collective effort, which is why it is not a ragtag band of MPs wanting to talk about why they don't like Europe as the ERG was. It is a collective. We work across the trade unions, for example. We work with the other socialist societies. It means we have representation on the NPF, we have representation in the NEC, we have representation on the regional bodies because we are an affiliate organisation. But we're only as strong and powerful and able to shape those debates as our membership is. So yes, when you join, you are supporting that work to keep going and to keep expanding. But I hope you can see, in having got, was it 57 MPs elected who were explicitly Labour Movement for Europe MPs to join that cadre, having got policies into the National Policy Forum, having got the attention of the leadership, what difference it does make when we do collaborate and we are all clogs together.
I think it's excellent. Well, if there's anything that we can do to help, then we will love to.
Well, then I'm going to ask Marianne to post into the chat the link for people to join. And obviously, if you are going to be in Liverpool this weekend, please do come to the rally on Sunday evening. As I say, if you're not, we are looking at how we could stream it. It may not be very high tech, I've got to be honest with you, because, as I say, our tech ability is a bit limited by me mainly, because if I can't understand it, we can't do it. But it is really important, because ultimately, this is the challenge, isn't it? You know, people want to consign this to a debate of history. You guys are living and breathing it right now. But people won't hear that unless your voice is a part of it. And they won't hear that unless you're part of the conversation about 2024. You know, those historical reenactment people who want to talk about 2016 and how great it was and how Brexit's going brilliantly do not want to confront what is happening at Sevington. We do, but we need your help and your support to make sure that's the debate that's happening on Europe, because it's too easy for them to turn this into, or you just want to undermine the referendum.
Right. I think you're absolutely right with that. Looking forward is what we're interested in. Brexit's happened. What next?
Yeah, but I also say there is so much that could be next, and that to me is very powerful and exciting. And frankly, the constituency that I represent, the communities that are struggling with what has happened, need us to be that determined. Please do not mistake my ruthless focus on, good God, how do we salvage something now, for a lack of excitement or radicalism about what could happen next. It is because I can't turn around. So I've got an amazing deli here who's a German deli, and she can't import her sausages anymore. She's going to go out of business, and she employs several local people. I can't say to her, don't worry, don't wait 7 or 8 years for change. She needs change now.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I can't work as I did before Brexit right now. I'm still waiting for change. We just cannot wait until you rejoin the EU. Not soon enough.
Well, and I'm not going to tell you that that's on the agenda at this point in time, because it's such a big challenge.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. We can't wait that long. We need some solutions sooner than that.
And we need, as I say, I can't be a politician who gripes at everybody else for finding people to blame if I don't then say, but look, here's something we could do.
Yeah.
You know, I think joining the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention would really help a lot of our manufacturers in the UK who are now finding they can't import, their supply chains are ruined by Brexit. Imagine how many jobs that could save and how much hope that could give to people who never thought this would happen, and yet, you know, it has.
Mm.
And absolutely, we can spend hours telling people we told you so, but again, that for me is back into the finding someone to blame rather than finding a solution.
Yeah.
Those people who came and tried to divide my community wanted to say change isn't possible, this is just about nihilism, and I refuse to accept that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stella. It's been a wonderful hour, informative, passionate, and thank you for answering all of our members' questions. I really look forward to reading the transcript, and obviously we will publish that once we've got that sorted and put it up on our website. So
well,
thank you so much for being
I'm relieved that
a part of
Andrew
this.
didn't ask me. I did a school visit today. You talk about youth mobility. I did a school visit today, and the children asked me how old I was, and the gasp was palpable from these young people. So yes, I'm with you, Andrew, that youth mobility is not for me per se, but I still think it's a good thing to explore.
Definitely.
Thank you so
lovely
much.
to have met you all. Thank you.
And thank you, Mariana, for organising everything. So thank you very much. It was lovely
Take
to see
care
everybody.
now.
And thank you all for coming.
Bye.